But let's start off with this Trump indictment. Round 4, as I mentioned, let's dive into this. With us now to help us break this down is John O'Connor. He's been with us before breaking down these Trump indictments. He's a legal analyst, the author of Postgate, How the Washington Post Betrayed Deep Throat. He's also the host of the Mysteries of Watergate podcast and served as an assistant U.S. attorney in Northern California, representing the United States in both criminal and civil cases. So he's here to give us a better understanding of these latest charges against Donald Trump. John, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Kim, good to be with you.
Okay, so just give us, first of all, the 1 second breakdown. Will these charges stick? Is there anything there with these, yes or no, on this?
Well, I don't think it's really two questions. I don't think there's anything there. I think basically the indictment takes 98 pages to say that Trump put together a scheme to try to overturn the election, and that the people writing the indictment thought it was really, he did it wrongly, that he was wrong in doing so. And essentially, I look at it as politicizing what the other side thinks is an irrational attempt to overturn the election, which Trump thought was unfairly held. Trump thought, rightly or wrongly, that in at least 6 states, there were votes that should not have been counted. Dead people, out-of-state people, some people counted twice, some places there were more ballots sent out allegedly than were returned, and so forth. But basically, that plus his idea that you needed to put together an alternative slate of electors. That is, and this was his Professor John Eastman's theory, that you challenge an election by impaneling alternative slates of electors and then hope that someone says that there's at least a controversy, and maybe this goes to the House of Representatives to decide which state should win, as happened in Rutherford B. Hayes against Samuel Tilden in 1876. That's how it happened. So you need alternative slates of electors. So it's a combination of alleged false statements, of suborning people to supposedly break their oaths by asking an official to swear to something that he didn't want to swear to. My problem is, Kim, here's one of the real problems here. This is a Georgia indictment, and it covers 6 states. Now, what is a Fulton County DA doing talking about false statements in Arizona and Michigan and Pennsylvania, and who calls up who? There are 19 indicted co-conspirators. There are 30 unindicted co-conspirators. And I've looked at this from my view as a lawyer who litigates cases and also is called upon to give expert testimony as to how long and how much effort attorneys should put in cases. This case, in my estimation, and I'm not exaggerating, if it were to go to trial based upon the allegations in this complaint, I would be stunned if the trial, I'm not talking about pretrial now, Kim, I'm talking about trial. I would be stunned if this case could get tried in 2 years. You have to go through the allegations of all this supposed voter fraud or irregularity in 6 states.
Mm-hmm.
That's impossible. It's impossible if you were just taking one district. It would be a heck of a case. You'd still have thousands of witnesses. Literally, and I'm not exaggerating here, there could be millions of witnesses here. But the allegations are so broad and so sweeping. They have hundreds of alleged bad acts in the indictment. But in the indictment, one bad act may have 6 subparts. For example, Trump's associate calls up somebody in Georgia or somebody in Pennsylvania and says, we have facts that, 2,500, I'm making up these numbers, 2,500 out-of-state people voted. So many felons voted. So many people that weren't registered voted, and so forth. That's just in one of the hundreds of bad acts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how long would that one bad act take to try? Would Trump come in and to try to prove that he at least had a reasonable basis for that? do we get into all the proof of how many people might have been a felon and voted, or how many people might have been an illegal immigrant? I mean, this is impossible. This is a case that's impossible. Now, I've said before that the civil suits trying to challenge the election in Trump's favor were rejected by courts mainly because they were non-justiciable. That is to say, it's too hard for a court to determine, even if there's a wrongdoing or a wrong procedure followed, that one side would have won or lost as a result of that failed procedure, which would require hundreds of thousands of witnesses.
Yeah.
Now, having all those cases been dismissed without a trial, because it's impossible to try those cases in essence, now you have the second criminal case, the first being Jack Smith's January 6th case, which does the same thing. This literally is seeking, as Jack Smith's case is, to relitigate 6 states and their election and whether those elections were right, wrong, or indifferent. How can you do that? And I say 2 years, you would have to speed. You would have to be on 24-hour trials to get this thing done in 2 years. How are you going to do it? It's an impossible task. And secondly, what is a Georgia DA doing talking about Michigan law, Pennsylvania law, Wisconsin law, whether any of these things are illegal, whether somebody's breaching their duty under those state statutes? I shake my head at this. The only thing I would say is this is meant and probably will effectively tie Trump and his lawyers up. Do I see it getting to court anytime soon? Not if a judge is fair, not if a judge allows any kind of pretrial discovery and allows a challenge to these allegations. I think there's so much constitutional questions that if I were an appellate court judge in Georgia, I would say, wait a second, what are you doing charging out-of-state illegality? Yes, you have a general fraud statute. You have a Georgia RICO statute. For your audience, RICO is racketeering, influence, corrupt organization. It's modeled after the mafia. The RICO is a mafia statute. A mafia is an illegal organization, so you can say, okay, everyone in the local chapter of Cosa Nostra in New York is a RICO organization, so everything they did, everybody who's involved, we're going to get the whole net. And so we can use everybody's statements against them, all 100 members of the organization. That's what they're trying to do with this. It's a RICO case. So all 20 defendants and 30 unindicted co-conspirators, all their statements come into issue. It's Kim, this is strange. I'm looking at this, and all they're doing here is politicize. This is my opinion. All they're doing is politicizing political differences and perhaps politicizing an awkward, I think it was, to be fair, Trump's legal team made awkward attempts to try to overturn this election. They were clearly understood that they were Hail Marys. They were trying to be, quote, creative. Their detractors call them crackpot. The fact is they were creative strategies, unusual strategies. Can you do that? And let me give you an example of this. Let me give you an example of this in terms of Al Gore. When Al Gore challenged George Bush in 2000, he put forward a couple of claims that were just turned out to be delusional, that there was anti-Jewish bias in Broward County and that the voting machines, interestingly, didn't count votes correctly. Both of those turned out to be fabricated, stupid, silly, ridiculous. But I thought Al Gore had the right to make those challenges. This is a democracy, and if he's got something to say, let's hear it. Why can't Trump do the same thing? I ask your audience, and I ask people, this is a democracy. It's supposed to be rough and strenuous in the election. And he was following, whether he did it right or not, he was trying to use our institutions in the correct way. Now, as I know as a lawyer, the judge says one party or the other is wrong in what they're trying to do in any particular case. In this case, Trump was probably wrong in his procedures. Does that make him a criminal? I think this indictment is even worse than Jack Smith's January 6th indictment. The only indictment I've seen, and the only part of any indictment I've seen that has any merit at all, is the obstruction charges in the Mar-a-Lago case. Those things are classic obstruction, hiding boxes, making a false certification. That's the only nugget of what I would call a legitimate charge. Now, Trump may have a defense to it, but those are at least legitimate charges. Nothing else, in my view, is legitimate here.
It's interesting. So you're right. These were creative strategies to potentially to challenge the election. I mean, he was definitely challenging the election. And for him to say, okay, we're going to have this alternative group of electors, right? Is that what come up with this? And then, but it was all within the rights and it might be never have been done before. It might be unusual, but it would be within the legal rights of what can be done according to legal scholars who were giving him some legal advice, right? What's interesting about this is that when I look back at just even the 2016 election, there was, I guess, if we're going to call this racketeering, I suppose there was a mob-like, mafia-like mentality during the 2016 election to have the electors in the Electoral College go to the convention and actually change their votes. There's an ability, the Electoral College is the one who really does cast the votes, and many of the states require them to vote in the way that the state wants them to vote, but not all of them do. And so I remember there was this concerted effort. There was a push. There were people calling for it, saying, just go, but don't vote for Trump. Vote for somebody else. Go for an alternative that we could be happy with, like Mitt Romney or somebody who's like, yeah, a Republican, but a Republican Democrats can live with. And there was that effort, if you remember. And so why wouldn't that be considered this sort of mafia-like attempt to overturn an election? Because that was, so how do they decide that this is racketeering, but the other examples are not?
Well, that's exactly it, Kim. I mean, what's sauce for the goose should be sauce for the gander, and they don't look at it that way. Just because someone makes a claim that is ultimately deemed by a court, by a tribunal, by whoever to be incorrect, that doesn't make it wrong to do it. As the saying goes, I may disagree violently with what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. But that apparently is not what we've got here. Trump was not trying to overturn our processes. He was trying to use the processes in a way that was deemed unavailing to him ultimately. Mike Pence said, no, I disagree with you. I'm not going to do this. I don't think it is in my role as a ceremonial vote counter to delay the vote count here. Other people tried to convince him otherwise, but they had their shot at Trump, or at Pence rather, to change this. But that doesn't make it wrong the same way as you point out. That's the best analogy I've heard, asking people to change their vote against Trump in 2016. This is what happens. I mean, look at the Kavanaugh hearings. A bunch of people that were anti-Kavanaugh surround Senator Jeff Flake, and they urge him, they don't let him move unless he agrees to delay the hearings. Now, are they obstructing that hearing? No. I'd say this is rough democracy. They're petitioning for redress of grievances. That's what Trump was doing. He was petitioning our legal system, legal authorities for redress of grievances, in this case to Mike Pence. Earlier, some of this also has to do with December 14. In each state, December 14 is the day that they certify their electors, and he wanted certain people on December 14th to say, no, I'm voting for Trump, or I think Trump won. And he was seeking alternative slates of electors. And in some cases, he's asking people to change their allegiance, so to speak, from Biden to Trump. But that's within democratic norms. I just think that, and I look at it and I say, if I were giving advice and it had to be followed, I wouldn't have done that because I saw it had so little chance of success.
Right.
looking down the road, but that doesn't make it wrong. I mean, all over the country right now, there are lawyers disagreeing as to what the best path is to go forward and whether or not it's unsuccessful or not. And sometimes a judge will say, oh, that's good. That's creative. I like this. I'll accept it.
Right.
And other times the judge just slams the door and says, this is the worst thing I've ever heard.
Right.
For example,
but these long shot, but basically long shot attempts, even in interpreting law, that's what courts are for. That's what the Supreme Court does primarily, is just interpret law, because it can be interpreted a variety of ways. And you've got even the Supreme Court justices not agreeing with each other on the interpretation of laws, right? So we should be allowed to read a law and say, I think it says that I have the ability. Like, for example, I interviewed a gentleman who was born in India. He's running for president of the United States. As many of us know, you have to be a natural born citizen on U.S. soil in order to be president. But he says, no, wait, the law doesn't actually say that. The law uses this particular language. And he pointed out the language and said it could be interpreted. It's just never really been challenged. It could be interpreted that somebody born somewhere else could actually still potentially be president of the United States. That's maybe a long shot, but he has the right to that long shot, right? I mean, he has the right to go to the courts and challenge and say, I'm still running for president. I'm going to try. You might tell me that I'm wrong and that no, the law, this is the way that we're interpreting this law, but I'm going to try just in case you maybe interpret the law differently. And that seems to be what Trump and his team were trying to do when they were coming up with these creative ways to challenge the election. It was like, well, it could be interpreted to where you can delay this proceeding, or you can do this, or that could be done. But they were, from my understanding, definitely using legal means. They were definitely trying. They were just interpreting the language maybe a little bit differently.
Well, that's right. Look at this recent Montana case where these kids come into court and say, Judge, I have a constitutional right for the state to address climate change. Right. If they were to come to me as a lawyer, I'd say that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. How can you come in and say, gee, I have a right to have this done, have the legislature do what I want them to do for climate change? But a judge thought that was kind of cool and has accepted it and just issued a ruling. Now, right. I would think that's an example of a 1 in a million shot that made it. The judge said, hey, yes, I like that. I like your thinking, And remember this, Roe v. Wade, for 200 years, nobody thought there was a constitutional right to have an abortion. That was a long shot. Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought it was a badly decided case. But hey, everybody was very excited about that. Oh, what a novel, wonderful way to interpret the Constitution. And I think one of the justices said it's in a penumbra of an emanation of the Constitution. Now, that's called a long shot, but it made it.
And just so people understand that, Roe v. Wade, the reason why it was decided the way it was, not the recent ruling that overturned it, but the original one was about a veil of privacy. Like, you have a level of privacy. It wasn't about the woman's actual right to have an abortion per se. It was really about your right to privacy, which then gave you that right to the abortion. So it was a creative way of getting to that point. Is that what you were saying? It was a creative method.
That's my point. Yeah. That's my point. There had been a case, Griswold v. Connecticut, which said there was a right to privacy to use contraception. Now, It's not stated in the Constitution, and that's a fairly creative use to find there is a right to privacy in the Constitution. I'm not sure there is. As I say, it's a penumbra of an emanation of the Constitution. So what I'm saying is there are cases, my only point is, Kim, is that there are cases in which judges have accepted long shot theories and said it makes sense. The way the law and the society is evolving, these principles should apply here. So you can't fault somebody for trying. That's what this is.
That's where it gets really dangerous from what it looks like, is that to say, okay, this was a long shot for Trump and his team to attempt all these various creative ways. They were long shot. And because you failed, we gave examples of them winning with the Montana climate change and with Roe v. Wade. But in the event that you fail at your long shot, they're basically saying, now we can file charges against you. If you fail, then you're a criminal. So that's How are they turning that into criminality? How are they saying you failed in the courts? I mean, that should have been good enough. Honestly, why are they even filing this? It's not like Trump is not president of the United States right now. It is Joe Biden. Trump challenged in his creative ways, didn't get anywhere for a variety of reasons. And so, okay, that's actually the legal system at work. Why then are they then taking this extra step and saying we're going to punish you for your attempts? And what kind of precedent does that set moving forward for people? Because this could be very dangerous, it seems.
Well, yeah, there are two things that are at work here. Number one, it's a way of taking out your main candidate. So they're using this politically to disadvantage a candidate. But there's a second aspect to this, in which is it a broad attack really on free speech. There are people who want to silence anyone who says our elections are not being run the right way. Remember, if they keep running elections the way they're run in 2020, which was pandemically caused, it was much loosened standards as to how votes were accepted and curated. The Democrats would like those procedures to stay in place and not to have anybody challenge them. And if somebody challenges them, then they're ripe to be criticized as being election deniers or telling the, quote, big lie. Whereas, in fact, what they're doing is they're seeking election safeguards. So there is a secondary agenda here, which is to silence everybody who's going to be demanding stricter election safeguards. And I think it's always in the Democrats' favor to have very broad and loose standards for accepting votes in urban areas. And that's what this last election was decided at, was the maybe 5 or 6 big urban areas. And that's what swung the tide to Biden. And they want to keep those standards in place, very lax standards. And as I point out in several things I've written, that traditionally there was a certain percentage of ballots that were disqualified for formal insufficiencies or for not having the right signature or not doing this, not doing that, not having an outer envelope. Those percentages plummeted in 2020. That is to say, in the urban areas, the expected percentages of disqualified votes went way down, which helps Biden because 4 out of 5 of those disqualified, otherwise with disqualified votes, went to Biden. So by not disqualifying them, their votes for Biden, 4 out of 5 of them are. Well, that's what they would like to keep in place. So some of this is political, and it's a difference between Republicans and Democrats and their philosophy. And again, I'm not faulting the Democrats. If I were Democrats, that's what I would want. I would want loose standards. Republicans want strict standards. And so what they're trying to do is intimidate people from railing for tighter voting strictures. So it's political. So this is a political case designed both to punish Trump and everyone who was his supporter. And remember, all his supporters are going to be paying lawyers. Their cash is going to be drained. I don't know how Trump's going to be able to pay for this. He will not be able to campaign. And meanwhile, it silences all the people out there that want the next election to be fairer and more tightly controlled as in the past.
And that's, I think, the real danger here is the fact that, they are trying to tie up a candidate. Here they are saying, oh, we're all about free and fair elections. And meanwhile, they're doing everything they can to tie up a candidate that people clearly want. He's leading drastically in the Republican polls. He has a very good shot at beating Biden. Now that people have tried out both of them as president, people do not like Biden. And with them continuing to go after Trump, more and more of us who never voted for Trump before are thinking, next time I'm voting for Trump, because this is just getting absolutely insane. So, but they're meddling with democracy if they're going to tie him up in the courts and drain the supporters' money, not towards the election, which is what people want their money to go towards, but instead towards defending him in court. One question I have for you about all of these co-defendants, I guess, that are being indicted in this, because there was 19 people named, and then they mentioned persons 1 through 30 who have not been named, that are not indicted. but maybe could be indicted. And then they said there's also unnamed people or unknown people that are known to the grand jury or unknown to the grand jury that could also be involved in this big old racketeering scheme. So you got all these people involved. The people that are named on this one with Donald Trump, you've got Rudy Giuliani, you've got Mark Meadows, you have, you do have like Sidney Powell. So are they're charging all of these 19 with all the same exact charges? Or is it a little different? Like some charges are for Trump and some charges are for Sidney Powell and some charges are for Mark Meadows? Or is it that they're, as a group, they're all getting all of these charges?
Well, that's one of the dangers or benefits of conspirator liability and RICO liability is everybody who's in the conspiracy, even a little bit. I can be in a conspiracy, and if the conspiracy is a 6-state conspiracy and I only act in one state, I'm still part of a 6-state conspiracy.
Wow.
So generally speaking, for the most part, and there's going to be some charges here. I haven't gone through and parsed out how they do it, but generally speaking, the conspiracy allegations allows people to be charged for acts that they didn't commit, but they were conspiring with other people. And those other people committed the acts. And I've prosecuted conspiracy cases. Everyone doesn't have to do every act. But you're robbing 6 banks. You may not be involved in banks 2 and 4, but if it's charged as one conspiracy to bank rob, you're held liable for the whole conspiracy. So
for all of it. Interesting.
This is what's dangerous. Also, they're using the conspiracy laws to cast a wide net, and the RICO statute is conspiracy on steroids. So everybody's part of this organization. Well, there's no real organization here. It's not like the mafia. It's not like you have a company that's doing something illegal. It's a bunch of people, but they call it an organization. So everybody is in for a penny, in for a pound on this one. So it's very dangerous.
So with all of these defendants on here, are they all going to be do they each have to get their own individual attorneys, or can Donald Trump's war chest pay for everybody with one set of attorneys that defend all of them at the same time?
No, I don't think that's possible because there's such inherent conflicts, and I think the prosecutors would come in and tell the court that the defendants can't do that. There's inherent conflicts. But the second question you point out is, can there's nothing wrong with Trump or Trump's PAC or whatever paying for everybody's legal fees. These people have to be represented. And so how they're going to pay for legal fees is really going to be interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of fundraising based on this. But as we say, this is draining money from money that would otherwise be used for the campaign. So it weakens our democracy when we're not using the money to get the message out from each side. And it's effective. I mean, let's face it, it's effective. People are going to have to spend an awful lot of money on this case.
Do you think I'm getting legally creative? So, let's hope no indictment comes after me for my legal creativity. But do you think that we, the people, have a case against all of these different indictment filings against Donald Trump? It seems to me that we, the people, are being harmed by this because we are wanting a candidate to be able to run. They're then tying up this candidate in court, forcing us to then have to pay for their defense, essentially, because we're wanting a democracy here. Can we, the people, join in on some sort of class action lawsuit against all of these government bodies that are indicting him, saying that they are, in fact, the ones meddling with our democracy by putting us in this position? Does that make sense? I mean, there would be a much more robust, thought-out legal argument on that, but it seems to me that they're harming us, we the people, and that we have a case against them because of that harm.
Well, that's the problem. We give prosecutors immunity for anything within their discretion, and unless you prove some corrupt action, just taking bribes or some such, I think it is very, very difficult to do that, and this is why this is so harmful. Because we vest prosecutors with this immunity precisely so that they can go about their business, and the mafia, for instance, can't sue them and put them out of business, and some prosecutor who doesn't have a lot of money, we want to do that. We want to protect them. But here's the problem. Now these prosecutors are using all their immense power and their immunities to make these charges And so, unfortunately, it really goes to the jury of public opinion. Now, in the case, the Duke Lacrosse case, the prosecutor in that case willfully hid DNA evidence, and he was disbarred in North Carolina. I don't know if they actually filed a criminal charge against him, but that's about as far as you're going to see. Obviously, if somebody gets bribed, that's a public corrupt act. But generally speaking, within the ambit of just simply bringing terrible charges, the real problem here is these prosecutors get off scot-free. And this is another danger. This is, once again, weakening the fabric of our society. We expect prosecutors to be better than this. I was a prosecutor, and you wouldn't know from approaching anybody in the U.S. Attorney's Office where I was, you wouldn't know whether they're Republican or Democrat. And that's the way we wanted it. And that's the tradition of most good district attorney's offices, whether they're federal or state. These people are generally pretty straight, and it is a bad happening. It's a bad omen for this to occur now when the whole world puts these people in disrepute. This is a terrible message for our democracy. This is, by the way, Trump is being tried for subverting democracy in these cases. Everyone's democracy is getting subverted by these charges. They're terrible charges. Right. As I say, other than the obstruction charges in Mar-a-Lago, which I think are legitimate.
Right. Well, then they would have to go after Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and Mike Pence and all the others who did the same thing. I have one last question for you, and that has to do with the leaked document. There was on the Fulton County website there, they had put out the indictment, or it was released in advance. And then they came out with a statement and they said, oh, those are fictitious. But then when the actual indictment came out, they were identical. So and then Trump came out and said, well, this is clearly not a democratic process because before the grand jury could even vote, they already published this on the website and then they took it down. And now the charges are exactly the same. Can you explain why that's a scandal? What happened with them posting those in advance before the grand jury even voted?
Well, strictly speaking, the only thing you're supposed to publish that comes out of a grand jury is the indictment, the true bill that they issue. And then there's limited rights, of course, for the defendants to get transcripts of the grand jury proceedings. But it's illegal to leak anything from a grand jury. If I'm a prosecutor, I can't come up and take a document from a grand jury and go give it to a reporter, for example. I can't do that. That's a crime. Woodward and Bernstein almost got charged for that in Watergate. You can't do it. So here, somebody violates the law. You can't make this up by putting out an indictment before it's really charged, and therefore it's a violation of the law. This is interesting. I mean, they talk about all these violations that Trump made, and then they violate the law. That's why the district attorney said, gee, she doesn't know how the clerk's office works, has no idea. And, it'll be all chalked up to a clerical error. But if it was done, willfully, of course, it's a crime. Let me put it this way. I suspect it's an error. I think somebody just jumped the gun here. It's like in Oklahoma, somebody's a Sooner and so forth. So probably nothing's going to happen here.
Okay. So is it normal for them to know what the charges were in advance and have them all ready to go before the grand jury even voted, and then, to be able to leak a document like that?
Oh, sure. Generally in prosecutor's office, you write up all the charges. The grand jury, you've been talking to them for weeks and months, and they know these things are coming, and you do up the true bill in your office, and then you bring it into the grand jury and pass it around, and they vote on it. Now, before that gets to the grand jury, obviously, you're supposed to keep it under lock and key. It didn't happen here, huh?
Right, because also the grand jury might reject some of the charges, and then you'd have to erase them from that list.
Well, that's right. And that's why it makes the system look bad, because usually grand jurors do what prosecutors ask them to do. Yeah. As one Hillary Clinton's attorney general said, and the grand jury can indict a ham sandwich. So oftentimes grand jurors do what prosecutors ask them to do. They end up having a good, friendly relationship with the prosecutors. They trust them. And the prosecutors are the ones who are explaining the law to them, and as well as the investigators that come in and testify. So generally, there's a very close relationship. That's normal. And all you have to
Okay.
do in a grand jury is establish probable cause. And these charges are so complex that they twist your mind. If you're a lawyer, you're looking at this, they're twisting your mind. Um, to these grand jurors, this all sounds like an evil scheme, this evil scheme of this evil Trump organization trying to change the election. And so there we have it. But I'm not so sure any of it. Whereas it's a scheme, it's a plot, as all political campaigns are. All political
Yeah.
campaigns are plots and schemes,
Yeah.
and all legal cases are plots and schemes. So you can easily say this is a plot and scheme, and the only question is whether it's illegal.
Well, yeah, this is what we do know about this latest indictment is that it is definitely setting a very dangerous precedent that you're not allowed to have creative ways to challenge things. And if you fail, then you could potentially be considered a criminal in some kind, like you're making false statements, false accusations, and you're now a criminal. And that's very, very scary, very terrible for our democracy, what is going on here. John O'Connor, thank you so much for joining us. John O'Connor, the author of Postgate, also the host of the Mysteries of Watergate podcast, and served as the Assistant U.S. Attorney in Northern California, representing the U.S. in criminal and civil cases. So we really appreciate your insight, John, and thank you so much for once again breaking down these indictments against Donald Trump. They just keep coming.
Yeah,
We'll see you again, I'm sure, soon.
I'm doing this full time now, Kim. Okay.
I think so. All right, John, thank you so much for joining us.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye. I do want to go over some of the poll numbers for Donald Trump, actually, because this is not thwarting him as much as the establishment thinks that, oh, we're going to charge Donald Trump. Everybody's going to see he's a criminal. And so and then people are going to finally turn on him. They're going to turn on him. And they're going to see that we can't have a criminal running for president or sitting in the Oval Office. But let's go ahead and take a look at, we got two different polls here that have just recently come out. Just pull one up here, and we'll and describe this one. We've got a New Hampshire one, and we also have so here's the New Hampshire 2024 Republican presidential primary. This one this was from last week, August 9th through 11th. And look at Donald Trump way in the lead there, 49% in the Republican presidential primary. So pretty much he's got it in the bag, I would say, as being the Republican nominee. You've got Chris Christie at 9%, beating out, surprisingly, Ron DeSantis by a percentage point. Chris Christie, of all people, is second in the Republican primary, with Ron DeSantis sliding into third. Ron DeSantis has really shown himself to be pretty darn establishment-y, not going to lie. So, but Donald Trump is being persecuted by the establishment, and so therefore he is, way in the lead. I do have to mention Ron DeSantis has been blocking people from coming on this show because he's so establishment. So I have reason to say that. It's not because I liked Ron DeSantis. I was a fan of Ron DeSantis, but I'm no longer at all. I'll never vote for that MFer after what he's done to me and my show of actually blocking people who are affiliated with his campaign from being on. I'm sorry, but he doesn't like my views on certain things, and we don't agree. And so because of that, he's done this whole censor thing. He's Mr. Censorship. And there's been a lot of other things circulating online where he doesn't allow journalists into certain events, and he's wondering why he's losing. Well, you lose when you behave like that. When people start to sniff that you are behaving like you're part of the establishment, they're going to reject you in these modern times of people being very anti-establishment. And that is why they're still supporting Donald Trump. So Ron DeSantis can kiss my ass. I'm not kidding. Let's look at this other poll. Sorry, that wasn't ladylike, was it? But believe me, he deserves it. Tracking the 2024 Republican primary, you've got Donald Trump there. Look at that. It's way in the lead. This time, Ron DeSantis is getting a second place at 16%. Donald Trump at 57%. And this one was just updated today. So, and Vivek Ramaswamy, he's sitting there in third place on that one. You don't have Chris Christie anywhere in the top three on this one. He's down below even Mike Pence, Nikki Haley. I actually think this one looks a little bit more legitimate in my mind. This poll seems to resonate with me as more accurate. I would think that Donald Trump is number one. Ron DeSantis is probably still number two. Vivek Ramaswamy, I think he's gaining. People like him. He's different. He's not part of the establishment. That's how they view him. He's an outsider, and they like that. Though I am surprised by Mike Pence sitting in the fourth spot. But then again, when you look at the rest of them, like, well, half the people no one's ever heard of. And so, yeah, okay, that's the polls there in the Republican primary. So going after Donald Trump, trying to thwart him, it's absolutely not working. It's only making him stronger. And amongst, that was the Republican primary, but amongst the general voting base, my guess is he's also going up in the polls in that way too, because people are looking at this whole witch hunt and thinking, this is insane. This is totally insane. And we got to support the guy who clearly the establishment hates, because we hate the establishment too. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend, which isn't usually the case, but maybe in this case it is. All right, guys, I want to tell you about the Wellness Company. Dr. Peter McCullough and a team of dedicated medical professionals established the Wellness Company as a response to a failing medical system, corruption, oppressive government health policies, and the lack of natural approaches to cure illnesses. Over 40% of Americans say that they would avoid a doctor or a hospital unless it was a catastrophic situation. And that's where the Wellness Company comes in. They got a lot of great, sniff around their website, take a look at it. It's really great. But I want to tell you specifically about this great kit that they offer, and it's called the Medical Emergency Kit. And the kit contains 8 potentially life-saving medications for you to keep on hand in the event of natural disasters, supply chain shortages, medical emergencies, or even an apocalyptic situation. So you can rest easy knowing you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, antiparasitics, all of that on hand to keep you and your family safe. And the kit also includes a guidebook detailing how, when, and the dosing for each of the medications. So if you're like me and you want to be prepared for the unexpected, go to twc.health. So that stands for The Wellness Company.health. So twc.health/Kim and use code Kim to save 15% off at checkout. That's twc.health/Kim. Use the code Kim at checkout for 15% off.